Let it load for a couple of seconds and let everyone filter in. Good morning, everybody. Awesome. Right. Before we begin this session today, there's just a quick notice to say that this session will be recorded and it will be posted on LinkedIn and on YouTube afterwards. So if you are interacting with this session, just to make you aware that any questions or comments that you put onto this screen that will then be used within the session, your name will appear on the recording. So just to pop that out there. So if you are interacting, please keep that in mind. But let's crack on with today's session. So welcome everybody to Remote Working, Wellbeing and Mental Health with Julie and Cristina. Before we dive in to introduce you to our speakers, I'm just going to hand over to Leanne, who's going to give you a bit more insight into who we are at the One Group. Over to you.
Thanks, Becca. So yeah, for those of you who don't know who we are, the One Group is a recruitment agency and we have specialist divisions, which means that our consultants know what's going on in those specific areas. So like accountancy and finance, marketing, HR, office, IT. Today, I'm in our Cambridge office, but we also have offices in Peterborough, Northampton and Potters Bar in Hertfordshire. So all our clients are based in and around those areas. So if you ever did need any support in your recruitment with the divisions that I said earlier, just ping me and Becca a message on LinkedIn and we can point you in the right direction. But that's all for me. Thank you, Becca. Back over to you.
Thank you. So let's dive in by introducing our speakers to you. So first we have Julie from Be You Consultancy. Good morning, Julie. How are you today?
Morning. I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Good, very good, thank you. Do you want to just give us a quick overview of who you are and what Be You Consultancy does?
Of course. So as Becca said, I'm Julie from Be You Consultancy. We were founded in 2022 and I empower businesses through people solutions. So whether that's HR consultancy, coaching, motivational analysis, or leadership development, a mouthful to say, I'm sure. And I've been in the world of HR for over 24 years now. So yeah, that's Julie from Be You.
Awesome. Thank you, Julie. And on the other side, we've got Cristina from CBG Solutions. Good morning, Cristina. How are you?
Good morning, Becca. Thank you very much. I'm very well and I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. That's what we like to hear. Do you want to give us a quick overview of who you are and what CBG Solutions do?
Yes, of course. So I'm Cristina from CBG Solutions and I am a GDPR professional. So these days I like to work with small and medium-sized businesses because I like to see them really thrive. And so I tend to gravitate towards them. I tend to have a hands-on approach and I use a holistic approach to my clients. In addition of implementing the GDPR, I also support them with any training that might be needed. I help them with process mapping and process optimization, as well as risk and change management. And I really try to educate my clients in this big subject that it is GDPR, so that once it's in place, they really understand it and know how to manage it. I'm Cristina from CBG Solutions.
Awesome. Thanks, Cristina. So let's crack straight on with today's discussion. So Leanne, would you like to start with our first question?
Yes, please. Thank you. So to help with mental health and wellbeing then, what strategies can an organisation use to promote employee engagement and a sense of belonging in that remote working environment? Julie, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, of course. So I think it's a really important point to take into consideration. And actually, I would start off with trying to understand what motivates people. By understanding the motivation of individuals, you can then empower that engagement, alignment, and then that sense of well-being. How, as your organisation, consider how you measure that motivation, whether that be through engagement survey, whether it be through motivational analysis. It's really important to get that fundamental value add, which I think an awful lot of individuals, especially following COVID, have had that realization that they want that extra from their employer. So with employee surveys, with motivational analysis, they tend to come through those online platforms. Even if you consider SurveyMonkey, it's an online platform. And with that, we really need to consider GDPR, who gets the information and why they get it. So, Cristina, I don't know if you want to add something there.
So obviously, as you say, there is data capturing, and so we need to be, an organization needs to be aware of security, data security, not just in terms of technical security, but also, other measures, making sure that only certain individuals that are supposed to have access to it, et cetera, understanding who is the controller, because there is different with different platforms, they have different roles. So if we're looking at the scenario today, LinkedIn is the controller of everybody attending data, but then we have the platform that we're using for the live version of today. They are a third party, but then we also have one group who are going to be using the recording and posting this on YouTube. So there is different controller and processor and different obligations there, and that relationship needs to be really clearly understood.
So in the remote working environment then, how can organisations try and help their workforce with their work-life balance?
Sorry, Cristina, did you want to answer that one?
No, you go first. I'm happy with that.
Okay, didn't want to just jump in. The joys of remote, isn't it? Of kind of everyone talks or nobody talks. So I think in terms of work-life balance or work-life harmony, or life-work harmony, as I like to call it, because I think when I think of balance, I think of that 50-50, it's a fair split. And of course, very few of us get that 50-50 split in life and work. We need to think about different methods of having a balance. So again, what does that mean to our employees? How can we help them find the balance? Think about activities that we've done in the office or done sitting at a desk, and whether they can actually be done outside, going for a walk. Think about during COVID, all the different things that we used to do, the walk and talks, where people go outside. Now, I don't know about you, but I think I've certainly experienced it where as we've moved back a bit more back into the office, those walks and talks have kind of dropped off. They don't have to. I mean, given the weather at the moment, not surprised. Nobody needs to go out in a storm. But as we move into the lighter seasons, maybe that's something that will help people feel that they've got that harmony. We can also make sure and check in with individuals if we're doing virtual calls, having the camera on. If we think about the model of communication, a lot of it's based on the tonality and body language rather than the words actually being said. So if we can't see that, we lose that measurement in a sense. And I think also there's things such as FOMO, again, something that came out of COVID, or certainly I learned out from COVID, the fear of missing out. If we've got people who are wanting to work from home or wanting to work from different locations because they want to promote that balance, how do we make sure that they don't fear that they're missing out? How do we make sure that we communicate with everyone rather than just those people in the office and remember people in the office? And as I alluded to earlier, with the virtual calls, if we were all in a meeting room, we'd be able to sense when people are about to talk, not talk, etc. Being virtual, that's quite difficult. That's certainly a challenge. So setting those rules in place of, if you're going to talk, how do you notify people that you're going to do that, rather than that all in, all out?
Yeah, I actually have an experience of that. I used to work fully remote for a company, and the whole team was in Edinburgh and I was fully remote. So they would have meetings and I would be on the screen, and it was very difficult to know when I could speak because I wasn't in the room and I couldn't get that sense that it was that time. Because when you're in the room, you just know. Yeah. Cristina, was there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, so in terms of, work-life balance is important, and whichever initiative the organization is using to promote work-life balance, there is always an element of data that needs to be considered. So it's important that all members of staff to be aware of their surroundings. So thinking of the walk and talks, for example, determine if anyone is listening to their conversation and they shouldn't, because this could really easily lead to a data breach. So think confidentiality. So make sure that you are in an environment that allows for confidentiality. And as Julie pointed out, during the lockdown, we saw a shift, in remote working, and therefore an increase in using, telecommunication system such as Zoom and Teams, etc. And we saw a lot of employers insisting that their employees had their camera on. Now, we need to remember that those employees were working from home. And in this country, we are fortunate to have human rights. And one of those human rights is privacy, in particular privacy at home. So while the employer can insist for the employee to attend, the conference call or the Zoom meeting or whatever it might be, they cannot insist for the camera to be on, as that would be breach of their privacy. Having said that, all of these apps that we have now, they've all introduced the ability to change your background or to blur it, therefore creating that, or excluding, creating a privacy environment. So if the employee has the ability to use those functionality, then there's no reason why they could not use a camera. But it's just to bear that in mind, that we do, all of us have a right to privacy, in particularly at home. And then in my personal experience, working remotely for most part of my career, I will always encourage an organization to have a robust communication plan, because that also helps enormously with making staff feeling that they're part of the team, keeping them up to date with what's going on, and also remove the feeling of isolation. So I would always recommend, a robust communication plan, to have in place. The other thing that I also wanted to add is that when we're talking about privacy, there is also expectation of privacy in the workplace. So we also have to bear in mind, when we are, as an organization, running any well-being initiatives, you need to think about doing them on a voluntary basis wherever possible. Not only that builds trust, because you're not forcing anything onto them. So for example, an example that I can give you, which I experienced myself in one of the organizations I worked in my past, where as part of the well-being initiative, the organization decided that every Friday they would give a bowl of fruit to everybody. Now, some liked it, some did not like it, and they felt it patronizing. Who are you to tell me what I need to eat? That kind of scenario. So why not ask them? Like Julie said, do a survey. You can do a survey and ask them what it is that they want, so that not only you get a higher participation, but you also get a higher chance of success. So that's my input into that.
So with the remote working environment, are companies allowed to track the data of the employee to see whether they're working without the employee knowing?
Well, there is a lot of things that the organization needs to consider when tracking and monitoring an employee. It is recommended to engage them and ask for their input into that. The organization should carry out what is called a DPIA, a data protection impact assessment, to understand the risk to the rights and freedom of the individual. So think of their privacy, again, think of data protection, but also they also need to have a lawful basis. and there is the consent. However, in an employer-employee environment, consent will not be valid due to the balance and power. So the only one would be legitimate interest, but then you will need to do a legitimate interest assessment, again, which is a balance test to demonstrate that the interests of the organization do not supersede the rights and freedom of the individual. But in many cases, tracking, especially tracking, think of the ski stroke. There's a lot of organization where they have introduced tracking of how much you're typing, basically. That can actually lead to discrimination, because you could have someone who is actually spending a couple of hours writing things down, brainstorming, talking to colleagues to get input, etc. So not touching the keyboard at all, but they're working hard. But according to the stats, the tracking, they have not done any work.
Yeah.
When it's not true. So that could lead to discrimination. But then, for example, other organization, they then use CCTV camera to track if the employees are coming in on time and leaving, if they're not leaving early or late. Well, the way I see it is that if an employee is coming in late or leaving early, well, then it means that they've got spare capacity. So excellent, we can give them more work.
Thank you for that, Cristina. So, Julie, to support people remote working with their mental health and well-being, how can organisations overcome the kind of self-isolation that people might feel and encourage collaboration with those people in the office?
Yeah, so I think when we think of socialisation, what does it mean to each of us? Because it's going to be different. We're going to have some people that actually, they don't see it as self-isolation. They see it as their own time. They get downtime. They get time to recharge. So I think, again, I feel we're pushing the surveys and asking employees, but really there's been a shift in, sorry, see Becca's screen go dark.
Oh, creepy. I think there's automatic lights in this room.
You're not moving enough.
I'll keep wiggling around.
So when we think about that isolation, as I say, I think we are suggesting that employers ask those questions for the individuals, because gone are the days when it was, this is what the business expects, this is how the employees respond. It's much more of that collaborative approach. If organizations are wanting individuals to be collaborative, they need to lead with that. They need to show that. So I think ask that question, but also be considerate of neurodiversity, where people want space or actually need that contact and need a routine, but also generational. Now, I know Leanne and I and the One Group, we did a podcast, didn't we, on Generation X, which was absolutely fantastic. We did that last year. But again, the different generations will have different needs and different expectations from their employer in terms of how much they want to be involved, how much they want to collaborate with other individuals in the group. If we think about quizzes, and again back to COVID, but I think COVID has so much that it shaped our working life so much. I think by 3 months in of COVID, we were all quizzed out.
Yeah.
It was crazy, wasn't it? Where people were just like, I'm done. I'm answering more questions. But think about, actually, are there ways that we can help drive that collaboration through fun activities? Not suggesting everyone does quizzes every 2 days or whatever it was.
Bring back the
quizzes. When we're thinking about enhancing collaboration, don't just expect the employer to come up with the ideas. The employee needs to come forward and say, whether that's joint screen working, so you FaceTime your colleagues and just work together. You can do that. Again, remember, you're doing it. So if you're going to suddenly burst out into song or dance or anything else that may embarrass you, you are on FaceTime. So that's the small print. Do hold that in mind. We've also got all of these different techs that we can use. We've got the technology. So whether it's even having a brainstorming session through a Jamboard and sharing that through Zoom, all of these possibilities are there. But whilst organisations are keen to roll out the new tech, which is brilliant, we've equally got to make sure that we're training people on it, taking into account that if they don't know how to use the software and the technology, they're not going to use it. They're not going to get anything from it. And therefore, it's going to stifle that collaborative approach. So there's lots that we can do, but also we need to help people get to that point.
Yeah. So talking of GDPR, Cristina, what security measures should organisations make sure they have in place to facilitate remote working?
Okay. So the first thing to consider with regards to remote working is really having a secure VPN in place. So I would say that is an absolute must. The second thing is to have remote working policies. So now such policies, they should include physical security. So for example, what I mean is, if an organization processes are rather manual, so in other words, there is a lot of data in paper, then the employee should be provided with lockable cabinets and drawers to store the papers. And also I would say, make sure that the policy also says not to leave the cabinet keys on display. The amount of scenarios where I go in offices or anywhere where you have lockable cabinets and drawers, but then the keys on the desk, so that kind of defeat the object. So you should also, as an organization, insist that the remote workers follow your lock screen and clear desk policies. So because the reason for that is that the employee needs to understand that while they're working in the home, which it's a safe environment, but there are other household members who are not authorized to have access to the data. So locking the screen when you move away from your desk to go and make a cup of coffee, example, then it's very much important. Now, if the employee is able to allocate a room within their home dedicated specifically for work, then they should be encouraged at the end of the day not only to shut down the computer, but also to close the door, so that, again, as a way of preventing unauthorized access. So all of these things can be part of the organization policy, remote working policy. If the workstation of the employee within the house is in a more communal area, like the lounge or the kitchen, for example, where there is a lot more traffic, then they need to be even more vigilant and more aware of their surroundings. So again, going back to the confidentiality that I mentioned earlier, so it becomes even more important for them to lock the screen, put away the paper in lockable cabinets when they move away from their working station.
Okay. Julie, was there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I was just going to add really quickly. I think, Cristina, in terms of your point of shutting down the laptop and closing the door, I think 100%. But I think also for well-being purposes, that's a huge thing, especially when you've got that boundary mix of working from home once 5 o'clock, 5:30, whenever you switch off, and you can see your workstation. If you haven't closed that down, if you have your papers out, which of course you shouldn't be doing, aren't doing now, that can actually stop you from feeling that you've disconnected with work. And I think for everyone's well-being, it's really important to have that clear split. If you think about the commute, that's your barrier. So if you're working from home, you've got to somehow find that barrier in how you close down for the day, so that then you can relax in the evening, or if you're a shift worker, relax in the morning, depending on what time you finish.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm lucky enough that I'm able to allocate a room within the house specifically for my business, and I shut the door at the end of the day, so that it's a clear barrier for me to say work is done, I'm now in the house, and relaxing.
Work mode done, home mode and done.
Absolutely, yes.
Do you have any tips on being in a communal area in your home, like, because obviously they're going to still be in that space after work, apart from the obvious of closing the laptop and being like, I'm done for the day? I don't know if sometimes maybe it feels like, because they can still see that area, it might still linger on the mind. Is there any other tips? Like, would you be like, say, to pack away the area, or is there any extra advice you could give if people are not lucky enough to have their own space?
Yes, put it away, or sometimes you can buy those I don't know what I think the screen, the floor to, not floor to ceiling, but you know what I mean, that you can move around the house, and perhaps you can sort of put the screen so that it separates the working station from the rest of the lounge or the kitchen, or something like that, so that you don't see it. It's another way of creating that barrier. If the room is too small and obviously the screen maybe doesn't fit, then put it away. If you have a bag or something, put it away in a drawer, in a cabinet, I don't know, somewhere, so that you have that clear cut. And like Julie said, that will help with your well-being as well.
Yeah, and I think even if it's not screens, if it's plants, so that you've got that divide, but also have a look on Google, see what other people are doing in terms of creating that balance, or Pinterest, or whatever may be your preferred platform, to get ideas for what you do. For me, I'm actually based in my main living room, tucked away in a corner, and I've got a screen that divides me from the rest of the room. But for me, that works really, really well. Now, my partner, who also works from home, is based upstairs, and we have signs on our doors to say, don't disturb. So when we're on calls, we've got that barrier. This is my work zone, his work zone, etc. So it can really works, because we're creating that office space without being in an office.
Like that.
Yeah. That's great advice.
Very me.
So we discussed quite a few initiatives on how to support mental health and wellbeing with remote working. Are there any considerations that organisations should be thinking about when collecting mental health data to support these initiatives?
So I'm guessing that question is to me, Leanne?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Okay, so I think it's important to understand that mental health data, it's about an individual emotional and mental state, and therefore that is considered medical data. Now, under the GDPR, medical data is defined as special category data. And Article 9 states that these are the exact wording: the processing of special category data shall be prohibited. Full stop. Okay. Now, to use the special category data, there are certain conditions that needs to be met. And I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm just going to say that in these scenarios, the one that could potentially apply is explicit consent. What we need to think about consent is that for consent to be valid, it needs to be freely given. And this is very important. In an employer-employee scenario, due to the power imbalance, the freely given cannot be achieved. and therefore will make consent invalid. So if the organization were to go ahead with processing that data, then they will process it unlawfully. So for the criteria freely given to be really truly met in this scenario, in the mental health initiative scenario, it can only really be achieved through the voluntary approach, which I mentioned earlier. So once you have your volunteers that truly wants to be part of that mental health initiative, then you need to think about keeping the data secure. So this can be achieved with technical security measures. So, password protect the spreadsheet, for example, or if you're sending the spreadsheet to a colleague, use encrypted email, or if the document is in a shared environment like SharePoint, then not only make sure that the document itself is password protected, but also that only those colleagues that should be authorized to have access to the file, they are the only one that have the access. But you also should be thinking of using what are called organizational security measure. So this is like pseudonymization. I know it's a long word. It's very difficult to pronounce, especially for a non-English speaker. But basically what it means is that if you have a spreadsheet, think for example, you are removing some personal identifiers. So for example, you're removing the name, but then you keep everything else and you're replacing the name with an ID, with a number, for example. That is pseudonymization. So you're using the technical security measure, which is the password and the encryption, and then you're also using the organizational security measure, which is the pseudonymization. Again, the organization should also think about data retention, how long they're going to keep their data, because unfortunately the days of keeping data forever are gone. So it's really imperative that the organization has a retention policy that covers this type of data as well, when it needs to be destroyed, what's the trigger, and that you have a robust process in place that keep your data clean, basically. So anything that it's older than a specific timeline, it's then removed and destroyed, whether it's electronic or whether it's in paper. So you have to have that sort of maintenance process in place, not just the policy. I hope that answered the question.
Thank you. So if anyone has got any questions or comments that they would like to ask, then please do. But whilst we're waiting for any of those to come through, Julie and Cristina, do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share?
I think for me, my main thought, my main ask is for organisations to collaborate with their employees, to ask them for the information, and also to be prepared to be flexible and actually amend things. Try and see if things work. They might do, they might not, but if you don't try, you're never going to know.
Yeah.
And for me, the final thought is, going back to the question about the tracking and monitoring employees, in terms of, that is invasive for a starter, but also, it doesn't really help to build trust because you're starting from a point of distrust. So I think you have to start with, the employees here to do a good job. So you have to allow them to do that. And there are other ways of establishing, their performance, whether they're working hard or not. Setting smart objectives is one, for example. Calling them, if they don't answer the phone at 4 o'clock because they've already switched off, that already tells you what you need to know. You don't need to monitor how many keystrokes they type. So there are other ways of doing that, and maybe the reason why they're doing that is because they're not involved. So get them involved. Maybe they're bored. So really help them to get, understand your employees. And there are so many other ways that are less invasive to monitor their performance, but also to build trust. I think that is really, really important.
Yeah. Thank you very much. So I haven't got any more questions actually, so I'm going to pass you back over to Becca.
No, thank you guys. That was a really, really great session. Even I've picked up some tips for when I'm next working from home. So it's really good. And I really liked the tips that, I was saying about the shared workspace, because I know a lot of people that work in a shared workspace and it's like, oh, it's hard to switch off from work. So I'll definitely be passing along those tips. I don't think we've had any more comments through today. However, everyone watching, if you do have any more questions that you'd like to ask Cristina or Julie, I've just popped their emails down there. So please contact them or give them a message on LinkedIn. I'm sure they're both more than happy to help you answer any questions you have. Thank you all for watching today's session. I hope it was really interesting and you've taken something away from it. And we can't wait to see you on the next one. So bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.